I have a couple philosophies, and I believe that some of it had to do with the war. Life was very short in those days, and I had made up my mind based on all the reading I did that I was going to enjoy life to the fullest. My name is Trabandt, and Trabandt essentially means knight apprentice, squire kind of thing.
Hugh Trabandt has followed through on a decision to live life to the fullest. Having an adventurous nature is in his DNA. Centuries ago, his ancestors were warriors who rode with the Teutonic Knights during the Crusades. They settled near the Baltic Sea and built major castles. One of the castles, the Marienburg Castle, still stands, and the Trabandt family crest still hangs in one of the hallways.
In Europe, especially in the rural areas, agrarian areas, it's common to have a family Bible. And in this Bible, the last part of it was reserved to enter births, weddings, death. So it's relatively easy to go back many years. So I have a fairly good idea that my family and the land holdings go back around 600-700 years. I was born on the 27th December 1934 in a small town called Elbing in what was then East Prussia. My dad's name was Wilhelm Trabandt, and my mother's name was Lily Ihnen.
Hugh's father, Wilhelm Trabandt, served with distinction with the German military during World War I.
First of all, I come from a long line of military folks. So my dad was in World War I. He went throughout the war, did his thing, got awards, and then was in Romanian prison camp, and he tried to escape twice. And that last time they were done with him, they were going to just shoot him. But the war just happened to be over, so he got reprieved by that.
After the war, Wilhelm Trabandt returned to a life of farming and continued his military service during World War II, again serving with distinction.
He was a major general and surrendered in Czechoslovakia. Subsequently, he became a prisoner of war of the Russians and stayed there for 10 years.
Hugh's childhood was spent in Berlin and then on a 3,000-acre feudal estate in Poland at the beginning of World War II.
I had a horse when I was preschool. It was a very docile horse that was a playmate as much as anything. And I rode it to school. I was in the Hitler Youth, which is equivalent to very more military Boy Scout, or Cub Scout rather. Prior to Hitler, it was well established. They called these Wandervögel, which means migratory birds. When Hitler took over, he consolidated all that into the Hitler Youth. The initiation of a Hitler Youth boy was usually under a big oak tree with a presentation of a ceremonial dagger. It was well done, but the ultimate aim was to have a generation of top-notch soldiers, and it worked like a champ.
Hugh's life was turned upside down after the German defeat in World War II.
After the 1945 invasion of the Russian army, we became refugees and got just barely ahead of the Russians in a horse-drawn sleigh. Everybody was wanting to go west because the atrocities that the Russian army had committed was legendary. It's difficult to talk about just how very, very bad this was. There were huge trains loaded with wounded German soldiers. My sister and I hid in the blanket closet by folding the blankets in such a way that it looked like there were blankets, but there was space behind.
A few years after the end of World War II, Hugh set off on his first worldly adventure. The result was not what he expected.
And I just knew that no matter what, I had to get out of Germany. There was no place for me. The damn city was 80% destroyed. And this fishing fleet had just been kind of cobbled together, so I hired on, just fair and square. I was 14 and that was okay. And after I puked my way all the way to Newfoundland, I jumped ship and tried to hoof it to the states on the map. It didn't look all that far.
Hugh quickly discovered his map reading skills needed improvement. America would have to wait. A farm family provided Hugh with food and shelter before sending him on his way back to Germany.
Took me back to St. John and to the German boat that was going back, and I puked my way back.
After the failed adventure across the Atlantic, Hugh returned to Germany to continue his education. A surprising selection at school would soon provide Hugh with a second chance at life in America.
You have to go to vocational school 1 day a week. And in that school, they asked if anybody was interested in going to the States for a year to stay with an American family as an exchange student, basically. And I jumped at it, and to my amazement, out of about 300 kids, they took 6, and I was one of them. So I stayed with the family in Kansas for 1 year, and returned to Germany. You had to, that was 1 year deal.
The Shoemaker family appreciated Hugh's hard work and sponsored his desire to return to America. It was now up to Hugh to obtain his immigration visa.
Each embassy has Marine Guards. So I would, every chance I had, I would go there, and this lady came by and asked the guards who this kid was that kept coming by. Well, they said he's been a year in the States and he wants to go back. And so she said, well, send him in the office. So she says, well, let me handle this. And I broke every record getting my immigration visa. My reason for coming once I got here was not just economics. I wanted to be an American.
Hugh bid farewell to his family and returned to Shoemaker Farm in Pomona, Kansas. During his time with the Shoemakers, Hugh was introduced to a cowboy culture and mastered the English language.
Well, hello. My name's Roger Shoemaker, and my mother was Hazel Shoemaker. And my father was Willard Shoemaker. And the farm, the family farm, which was close to where Hubertus and myself spent our time together. Most of our early time and our interaction was with horses. Hubertus had a horse, a big white gelding we called Trigger.
One of the first acquisition was a big hat and a pair of cowboy boots. And they had rodeos, and I had never really heard of what that was all about, except that bronc riders on a ranch were the top layer of expertise, and that's what I wanted to do. So I entered the rodeo and didn't do very well, of course, but I was kind of hooked. From then on, I tried to do that.
He would ask me questions, what words, what would this be or that word, and I would tell him the answers to what this is.
Roger was preschool, and he and I spent a lot of time together. The Shoemakers felt comfortable having him with me whenever there was something that we could both do. And I learned English from Roger.
After another year on the farm, Hugh was ready to explore his new country. Like countless other explorers before him, Hugh headed west.
When I got through with the Shoemakers, I wanted to be a cowboy. And went to Arizona, and sure enough, became a cowboy. I had a 41 Buick by that time, and packed my gear and went. And it kind of got sick about 20 miles outside of a town called Superior.
Little did Hugh know, but his broken down car would lead to fortuitous meetings with the Ensigns, people Hugh would soon begin to call family.
And the Ensigns had a motel right at the intersection. And so Millie came out and wanted to know if I wanted a room or something. I said, hey, I can't afford a room. And so she said, well, you look like you need something to eat, and why don't you stay for supper? And my boys, Billy and her husband, Bill, they rolled up the sleeves and checked out what was keeping this machine from running. Told them that I wanted to work on a ranch, and they knew everybody, including a lot of the ranchers. And Bill called some of them up, and one of them said, yeah, I can use some help. My first job was working a pack string of donkeys to haul cement to a project that they were doing, building a dam. And then the roundup time came, and I was elevated to cowboy. I liked it because it was almost like a dream came true. All this stuff, now forget about the heat, forget about the dust, forget about the bugs, but essentially this was something so different from what I had ever experienced. These saguaro cactus by themselves are a marvel, and the whole lifestyle. And a lot of the guys that I met had been in Arizona when it was still territory. So one of the places they had was a home of a genuine prospector. This bugger had all the, including his looks. He had a beard and he was dirty, and so I was supposed to move in with him. He had a well that he had dug and was very, very proud of it, claiming that it was the best water in Arizona. So it was my habit to fill my canteen in the morning, and after about 3 or 4 times, that water just didn't taste right. So I said, Joe, there's something wrong with this water. Oh, no, not my water. Well, it turned out that a bunch of mice fell in there and died and polluted the water. But that was something you just took in stride, and so we got the mice out and life went on.
Hugh's Arizona adventures included looking for Prospector Joe's hidden whiskey and a run-in with a mountain lion.
He had made moonshine whiskey during the Prohibition days and told me that he had hid a couple kegs in this Black Canyon. I was up there with a fellow cowboy, and I told him about what Joe said about these kegs. And we got digging around some more, and pretty quick the water had washed out the side of the thing, but there sure enough was a keg there, and it had whiskey in it, aged. And I just happened to come across the thing, and should have left him alone, but I thought, well, I'd take a pot shot at it. And so when he rolled down the hillside, he must have been confused. Not that he was aggressive, he just didn't know which direction to run. And he came running at me, and I shot again. And so it was just a little adventure that made that whole thing more colorful and more the way I had imagined it to be. That's important, that you have a childhood dream that became reality, and that's the way it's been throughout my life. All the things I have today, I dreamed up when I was just a kid. So. The Ensigns took me in, and Billy and I, to this day, are more like brothers and just like friends. As nice a people as you would ever meet. And the thing that I liked about them more than anything is a lot of people are nice because they think they're going to get rewarded in heaven or something. They didn't even know how to spell church. They were just good people. Good all around, and I sure benefited from that.
I consider him as close to a brother as I could have. I care for him a great deal. He's just more than a friend. He's not quite a brother, but a lot more than a friend. His life has been kind of just one adventure after another. He comes over from Germany after the Second World War and winds up in Kansas and works there for my great aunt, and then comes to Superior, becomes a cowboy, and one thing leads to another, and and on and on and on.
Hugh continued the Trabandt family tradition of serving in the military. He joined the United States Army during the Korean War, and new adventures would soon be on the horizon.
I already knew that I was going to serve my country and go to the military. And the war in Korea was still going on, but it was majorly winding down. But I enlisted to be a soldier, to do my bid, and wanted to join the cavalry. And they said, buddy, you're about 10, 15 years too late. They got phased out in 39. So well, do whatever you think. And I was with the artillery anti-aircraft gun, and that was as antique as the damn horses were, because the planes then were already the beginning of the jet plane, and the regular artillery piece had no hope of bringing one of those down. So they used it as anti-personnel. But I was there just long enough to bust my eardrum, and then they shipped me back to Germany.
Persistence by Hugh led to a new assignment in Germany. A mounted military police unit and a spot on the horse jumping team allowed Hugh to thrive during his remaining time in the Army.
I made repeated trips to the cavalry outfit in Berlin, and finally they took me in. And that was a unit that was mounted police. There I found my niche in the Army. It was a wonderful place. Had been the old German cavalry barracks, and eventually I became stable sergeant. It was a dream assignment for a horse person. As far back as cavalry was first initiated, there'd always been competition on horseback. I was a fairly good rider, so I was picked to represent the United States Army on the jumping team, and we competed against the other Allied, British, French, the German mounted police.
Hugh received an unexpected call from the captain while docking in Germany for his new assignment. A reunion 10 years in the making was about to take place.
The ship, the troop ship, USS Langford, I think her name was, docked in Bremerhaven, and I was called to the bridge, and the captain said, "Can you be ready to meet your parents in a few minutes?" My dad got out of Russian prison camp after 10 years, and to him the world had stood still in 45. And there was a headline kind of a thing, GI's son meets ex-German general. A lot of papers carried it.
After honorably discharging from the Army, Hugh returned to life as a cowboy. His expertise of horses led to a few roles in television and the movies.
I was raised with teams, horse teams. And to this day, machines don't turn me on. A nice matched team is, to me, is equivalent to Rolls Royce or whatever. In the 50s, I think it was, there were as much as 2 Western shows a day on TV. Bonanza and Rawhide and Paladin. I mean, it just goes on and on. And because these were Western shows, quite a number of them needed people that could drive a team. And I was asked if I wanted to do that.
Life as a cowboy led Hugh to a job in Colorado Springs. While attending nearby Colorado College, Hugh met Cindy Lawson.
I had spent just about a year in Aspen as a contract employee, and it was time to go back. My year's contract was up, and everyone told me, "Oh, you have to go to the Broadmoor Resort before you leave Colorado. It's a gorgeous place." So I walked over to the front desk in the Broadmoor, and I asked if they had a personnel department, and I started the next day. I was working for the scenic tour office. When I saw what all there was at the hotel, I thought, oh, I'd love to ride. I went over to the stables and I met the manager, who was Hugh Trabandt. I asked him, I'd like to ride. He said, you want to ride with me? I said, well, yeah, that'd probably be good because I haven't ridden in a long time. After we rode, he said, I'll make you a deal. You wash my socks, I'll give you horses to ride. And I said, thanks, no deal. And he said, well, how about this? I'm taking classes down at Colorado College on a scholarship from the Broadmoor. And so he said if I would type his essays, he would trade that. And I said yes, and we started riding, and just ended up dating. Took a while. In 1963, I married Hugh Trabandt, and we had 2 girls together. So that's where I fit in his life.
Hugh's rodeo career flourished after he settled in the Colorado Springs area.
Well, in the cowboy culture, the bronc rider is pretty much the aristocrat of the thing. It's what you aspire to be. I rodeoed whenever I had a chance in the amateur circuit, and then in some instances with the professional guys. But I did rodeoed a bunch, and I probably like the camaraderie more than anything. It's a dangerous sport that doesn't leave any room for petty stuff. So cowboys take pride in being honest, throw back to the old days. I enjoyed that part a lot.
And had some success.
Yeah, I suppose if you compare it to a lot of other cowboys, I was pretty hooked on it. I think most organizations that are a bit on the military, on the dangerous side, have some identifying thing, whether it's a patch or medal, and in the rodeo business, it is a belt buckle.
Hugh and Cindy settled in the Colorado Springs area and purchased a ranch. It was a place Hugh could grow his roots and continue the cowboy lifestyle at the same time.
We kept looking at land that was not too expensive but beautiful, and we found a ranch that had been homesteaded, many years before, and it was up for sale. It was just 240 acres, but they were beautiful. And there was a cabin and a house on it. It had a gorgeous view of the Sierras, and we rented out the cabin and lived in the house and started building barns for the horses and cattle. And
Duty called once again, and Hugh joined the Broadmoor Fire Department, a wealthy area in and around the Broadmoor Hotel.
I had a job at the local fire department for 40 years.
Well, I met Hugh when I was a young man in 1978. In 1978, I applied for the job here, and I had no experience as being a firefighter, but I did have a little Boy Scout training, which back in 78, that was considered high qualifications to become a firefighter. The more I found out about Hugh, the more intrigued I got about his history and his past. I got the honor of filling in for Hugh while he was gone. Little did he know I'd end up taking his job one day, which is fine because he retired honorably when that time came. One of the other little interesting things about Hugh that maybe he doesn't share with everybody, but he's probably broke almost every bone in his body at one time or another. About mid-morning one day, I got a phone call, and he said, hey, I was down here at the T-Cross Ranch, and I was breaking horses, and the darn horse bucked me off and stepped on my leg. I think I might have broke my leg. Can you come down and take care of me? And I rushed down to the T-Cross Ranch, and when I got there, Hugh had drug himself across this arena, and it looked like a slug trail where this injured cowboy had drug himself across this breaking pen. And I'll never forget, there was two things he wanted me to do. He wanted me to not transport him by ambulance, absolutely not, but so he wanted me to throw him in the back of his pickup truck. And he wanted to stop at a liquor store so he could have a beer on the way, because he said, if I get to the hospital and they do surgery, they won't let me have a beer for a week. So I want to stop and have a beer. So being the good assistant chief that I was, I stopped and I gave him his Coors Light, which was his staple. And so that was a pretty interesting day.
Hugh took advantage of the downtime at the fire department by honing his artistic talent, especially turning his carvings into bronze sculptures.
Hugh is also an artist, and he's a sculptor. He was sculpting a horse, and there was going to be a cowboy on the back of that horse, and that cowboy was going to be shooting down, so he grabbed a broomstick. So I sat on the back of the couch, and I held that broomstick, and I'm the model for one of his famous sculptures.
Basically on a bet, a fellow worked with me, challenged me to do a carving, and I did, and it turned out pretty well. And that beget other people that thought, well, if we had enough to make an art show, which typically want about 8 or 9 pieces before you can even do this, but the process of making a bronze sculpture out of the original is expensive. So I couldn't afford that, but these folks thought enough of my art to sponsor me. And indeed, we went to a show and I sold out the first time, and I thought my head would be so big I couldn't get back in the house. But it definitely inspired me to do more, which ultimately resulted in something like 100 different pieces, each about the addition of 20, that sold well.
Life was great, but Hugh was always looking for a new adventure. With plenty of land and horses at his disposal, Hugh and some friends started a polo club.
They call it the Sport of Kings, but it's a horse activity that is not over in a few seconds. Riding a bucking horse in my time was 10 seconds, that's 8. Jumping horses, that's still within a minute or two. Polo is played in chukkers. That means that you can easily spend 2 hours. So you have a thrill that is more than just 8 or 10 seconds. I had the horses to do this with. In fact, I had the land to have our own polo fields. And we hosted several games here. Then we went to other places to play their teams. I think we were pretty good at it. We won the Sherman Memorial Trophy. That was a very coveted thing. It was a wonderful time. We met a lot of wonderful people in the process, and it is a memorable thing for all of us that were involved in this thing.
The growing military presence in Colorado Springs area forced Hugh and Cindy to sell their ranch. An attempt at a city life was short-lived. Hugh's adventurous nature took him to Australia and was also the beginning of the end of his marriage to Cindy.
After this act of eminent domain, where we lost our ranch here, and we had a few bucks left over, but land was supposedly be very reasonably obtained in Australia. So I decided to go there and check it out by working on a ranch, not just looking at the ads and what have you. And I did that, and it was a very, very wonderful experience. The people were first class. Overall, I happened to be there in a good year. They had lots of rain, but I also heard enough stories about when they don't have it. And it still didn't. I missed Colorado, and so I came back, and that was the end of that.
He just wanted to travel, and I wanted to take care of the kids. My kids needed school and needed other kids. To him, it was much more important that he travel. So that's what he did, and I stayed home and worked and paid the bills and took care of my children. I don't know. We just had completely, utterly different priorities, and to me, he just wasn't the man that I met and fallen in love with and married. So it was amicable. He's still one of the most interesting people I've ever met. I know him, so I know how much he loves people and how much he would do for people. And he's my kid's father, so sure, we're friends. We're friends. We'll always be friends.
Hugh found the cowboy lifestyle, again with the help of a friend. Their adventures would lead to a hobbled Hugh meeting the woman he would spend the rest of his life with.
After the divorce, I was pretty much footloose and fancy-free. I had very few ambitions. I had a good friend that was a veterinarian.
Hugh and his friend had been on a ranch castrating however many hundreds of horses, and he happened to end up under one or some such thing. And
in the process, I busted my leg again. So we came back to Colorado Springs.
He was out with a friend, I was out with a friend,
and I was on crutches, and Marianne was there with a friend, very attractive. I spent about half an hour rehearsing different approaches based on movies, and finally I gave it up. And I said, I have to do this now because she's going to leave, and there'll be that.
So he hobbled up to me on his crutches and said something like he would like to have asked me to dance, but under the circumstances he couldn't. And so I invited him to sit and talk instead.
And we've been talking ever since.
The talking led to romance, love, and marriage. Marianne's linguistic skills fit hand in hand with Hugh's love of adventure. Their trips together took them around the world.
I think from day one I wanted to travel. I wanted to see the world.
Hugh, when he makes up his mind to do something, it's going to happen.
And so ultimately my wife and I traveled to places that were known to have horses, and that was in South America.
I would say that South America was one of my favorites for sure. I just can picture being up on the ruins of Machu Picchu and looking out over there. And we did have a trip on the Amazon, and there we met some of the native people. I did record some of their speech, the Quechua language, and also I have a recording of a flute player.
So then came Africa.
Elephants and lions and sable antelope, you name it practically, and we did have a viewing of it. We were on one tour that was about a 6-week tour that started out in London, then down into Paris, and then we went east to coast of Russia, and then we went down into Mongolia and China. That was a once in a lifetime kind of thing.
The ultimate trip led Hugh and Marianne to the land of the world's greatest horseman, Mongolia.
It was my desire, and luckily Marianne, my wife, went along with all this, to go to the cradle, certainly of stirrups. The Mongols invented the stirrup. And I was fortunate enough that these people, based on photos I had of myself on bucking horses and on other events, that they readily took to me, and I was able to do some things with them. It was a very rewarding experience, and these folks were nice and we enjoyed it.
Hugh's many adventures not only interested family and friends, but the media took notice as well.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to the Jim Bundy program on KVOR. And this, our second hour, as it turns out this morning, because we did the first hour, Let's Talk Colorado, sitting in for Ken Gaines. Our guest this morning is Hugh Trabandt. And Hugh is, among other things, the fire chief at the Broadmoor Fire Department, an American cowboy. But before we get into some of the things he's doing now, let's talk about a little bit of his history. Hugh, welcome to the program. Good morning. Nice to have you here. You have led a very, very, very interesting life.
I, as the viewer probably will realize, lived a little bit of the ordinary life. And some of this appealed to people, especially in the horse world.
Because Hugh does a lot of out of the way, maybe unique, unusual things. He's been written up in a number of newspapers and magazines, and he's done some writing himself.
One of Hugh's proudest accomplishments took place in 1965. He founded the Fort Carson Mounted Color Guard.
After about 2 or 3 years just doing what stable managers do, I got a little bit nostalgic about the horses in the military.
The Fort Carson Color Guard remains active and in 2017 honored Hugh with an intimate demonstration.
I know Hugh through my dad. Hugh would come out to the house, break horses. He was pretty much a fixture there for probably 32 years. After my dad passed away in 1988, Hugh wrote the eulogy and pretty much detailed from when he knew him to when he died. He was a big part of our whole family.
Hugh and Mary Ann settled in Colorado Springs area and purchased a ranch 5 miles up Cheyenne Mountain.
Obviously, horse has been my life. After things settled down, I obtained a ranch that was a hay-producing place, and we had horses. Marianne and I had a son who was in the Air Force, and a daughter that, as I mentioned, does a cabin.
Hugh's knowledge of horses led to another adventure, this time close to home.
The Broadmoor Hotel had a defunct ski area, which they wanted to have some use out of, and asked me if I was willing to put a riding stable there, and they would provide the guests, and indeed that's what happened.
They started the stables up here at the Broadmoor. It used to be called Ski Broadmoor, and my sister managed it. When the Broadmoor decided that property was a little more valuable to them as houses, my dad now had a place up Old Stage Road, a ranch up there, and he says, well, shoot, we've got the place, might as well let's put the stables up there.
And this was, first I was kind of concerned about the distance, but it turned out not to be so. But to make it work, it was a combination of my oldest daughter, Mary Ann, my wife, and of course me. All the buildings that are up there were built by my kids, my son included, my daughters, granddaughters, pretty much as it is there today. So we're a combination of horse-drawn vehicles, of riding horses, of cattle. We also have some wildlife such as elk and buffalo. And it's a unique, very worthwhile experience.
Dad's the visionary. He's the one that figures out what we're going to do, and then Jenny and I make it happen. So
I believe that the most appealing aspect of this entire operation is that it is such a very family-oriented thing, that I have these kids working with me, and I like to think that we raise some darn good kids.
Hugh's teachings and outlook on life are being passed on to his 6 granddaughters, and based on their successes so far, they're listening to his advice.
There's a total of 6 granddaughters. They all extraordinary horsewomen, and yeah, I couldn't be more proud of her.
My dad, we don't know what he has about him, but he wants you to, he instills in you this feeling like he's got to be proud of you. He's always very positive and very good at making you feel good about yourself, but you want to make him think you're really good too.
His biggest lesson he taught all of us grandkids was to work for what you want in life. You know, things aren't just going to be handed to you.
And I think so much of him making us independent at a very young age, you know, definitely contributed to my independence as an adult.
I think, you know, one of the things I brag on, and I brag on my dad a lot, is the fact that he's the ultimate cowboy horse person. Everything to do with a horse, he's done it. He is an amazing man, you know, he's a Renaissance man and doesn't have one hat. He has many, many hats.
Mm-hmm.
So it also showed us that we can do anything too.
I was like, he was my hero. He was someone I thought could do anything and everything, and as you're seeing and meeting him, you're seeing, or my mom even mentioned, I thought, you know, he's a great storyteller. Well, his life, it wasn't all stories, it was his life. So he was my Renaissance Marlboro man. I mean, he could do anything and everything.
Well, most definitely, my entire life, he has been my hero. I mean, in every sense of the word. And pretty much couldn't do any wrong. And I always wanted to make him proud. And he's always been very, very good of showing when he is proud.
The biggest things I remember from my childhood that sort of immediately jumped to mind is, of course, time on the ranch, or ranches, I should say, with horses, watching them break horses, rodeos, those kind of things, because I was always a little bit sort of otherworldly to see him get on those big broncs and ride them. We were just sort of taught that you can do what you want to do. There was no point where I woke up and said, oh wow, he's only a bronc rider, fireman, artist, that lived through 2 wars and has respect of everybody, did everything he could to be the best father he could to me. You know, there was no curtain to sort of hide behind. My dad has always been who he is. And there was no need for him to be, or try to pretend to ever be anything that he wasn't. What he was always impressive enough, and none of that ever changed.
Hugh and Mary Ann continue to remain active, Hugh helping at the riding stables and Mary Ann hiking with friends. Knowing Hugh, their adventures together won't end anytime soon.
She's been an incredible partner in everything we've done. So we made a good team.
Oh, it's been adventurous. It's had its ups and downs, but yeah, it's been wonderful. Yes.
I have a couple philosophies, and I believe that some of it had to do with the war. Life was very short in those days, and I had made up my mind based on all the reading I did that I was going to enjoy life to the fullest. And to that end, I embarked on different adventures, different occupations, but always it had to do with horses. At now the advanced age that I'm in, looking back, I actually can honestly say I have fulfilled every dream I ever had. The horse was a major part of that, and there is a saying in Germany that das höchste Glück auf dieser Erde ist auf dem Rücken der Pferde, or roughly translated that the greatest joy, of course, is on the back of a horse.